Welcome back to Unlocking the Paranormal, the podcast dedicated to uncovering a deeper understanding of the unexplained, one creepy deep dive at a time. I am your host, Carrie, and if this is your first time joining me today, I do appreciate it. You are actually listening to a spooky summer series episode where summer vacations take a terrifying turn. I thought that it would be perfect to share some spooky travel stories because as the weather warms up, school's out, families are packing their bags, they are going on vacations, going on camping adventures, and cozy little getaways. So, what better way to bring the spooky to the summer by sharing stories of haunted getaways? Now, last time we explored more than one haunted cabin, as well as a haunted bed and breakfast in Ecuador. Now, I mentioned in the last episode, I was actually going to be sharing another creepy encounter from that same bed and breakfast in Ecuador. And I cannot wait for you guys to hear this one. It is really good. Today's story involves something even more unsettling, a shadow figure that was seen by multiple guests over the years. According to the user Waldo Jeffers 65, many people reported seeing a dark figure in one particular room. In one incident, the guest staying there became so frightened that they ran downstairs and asked his wife to call the police. They claimed they had seen someone standing at the foot of their bed in the middle of the night. Then things got even stranger. The figure reportedly jumped out of the window and disappeared. Under normal circumstances, that might sound like an intruder fleeing the scene, but the room overlooked a walled in section of the garden. The walls were approximately 8 feet high and topped with broken glass bottles embedded in the masonry. The only entrance was a locked door. Anyone who had jumped into that area would have been trapped, and attempting to climb the wall would likely have resulted in serious injuries. Police responded and searched the property, but they found no one. There were no signs that anyone had entered or exited the enclosed garden, and no evidence that anyone had scaled the walls. Now I have to ask, why is it always at the foot of the bed? Seriously, if you're listening to enough paranormal stories, such as the very first spooky summer series episode, you'll notice a pattern. They're almost always standing silently at the foot of the bed, just watching you sleep. And I know for a fact I have shared encounters on social media where the exact same thing is happening. It is such a common detail that it's becoming almost a paranormal cliche. Maybe it's because that's one of the first places our eyes naturally focus when we wake up in the dark room. Whatever the explanation, it's a detail that comes up again and again, and in this case, it was enough to convince terrified guests that they needed the police. So, with that being said, here's my call to action. If you have had a shadow figure encounter, where did you see the shadow figure? I would love to put together an episode and compare where you are all witnessing these shadow figures. And as you will learn, or if you haven't already figured this out about me, I have witnessed a shadow figure before. And both of the times it was right next to my bed, and one of the times it was towards the foot of my bed. Now, I actually shared this encounter on a social media post a while back, so you can attempt to find it there, or you can catch it in the very first episode of season 3, where I plan to share all of my personal encounters that I've had over the years. Lastly, with this story, what do you think they saw? Do you believe it was a shadow figure, or do you believe that a person perhaps did successfully scale a wall without leaving a trace? Okay, now we're going to jump into the second story of today's episode. This next story comes from a Reddit post about a camping trip that took a seriously, deeply unsettling turn. This was actually shared by user Bringer of the Nachos, and it was actually shared about 13 years ago. According to the writer, a group of friends had planned a getaway to a remote cabin owned by one of their cousins. The cabin was located so far into the wilderness that there were no roads leading to it. Reaching it required a hike of nearly 3/4 of a day from the nearest parking area. Because of work obligations, the writer couldn't leave with the rest of the group. Instead, he set out later on his own. Since the final stretch of the trail was considered too dangerous to navigate at night, especially for someone unfamiliar with the route, he planned to camp alone and finish the hike the following morning. As evening fell, he found a small clearing in the woods, roughly 40 feet across, and set up camp. He built a fire, pitched his one-person tent, cooked hot dogs over the flames, and settled in for what he expected would be a peaceful night alone in nature. But as darkness settled over the forest, he began hearing movement along the edge of the clearing. At first, he assumed it was an animal. The woods were full of them. But as the hours passed, he realized whatever was making the noise seemed to be circling the clearing over and over and over again. Once he started paying attention, he counted 4 or 5 complete laps around the campsite. Finally, he stood up to investigate. The sound stopped instantly. A moment later, he thought he heard something moving away through the trees. Assuming it had been a curious animal, startled off by his movement, he shrugged it off, extinguished the fire, and climbed into his tent. Not long after, he drifted into that strange state between sleep and waking, the kind of half dreaming awareness where sounds can seem disorienting or unreal. That's why, at first, he didn't think much of it when he heard a voice. Then, something made him fully alert. The voice was real, and it was right outside of the tent. It was barely above a whisper. He couldn't tell if the person was speaking another language or simply speaking so softly that the words became impossible to understand. He lay frozen, listening and waiting. The moonlight was just bright enough to illuminate the walls of the tent. That's when he saw it. A hand pressed into the fabric near his feet from the outside. The sight instantly snapped him into action. He sat upright, and whoever was outside reacted immediately. They ran, not casually walking away, not sneaking off, running at full sprint through the woods. He burst from the tent and swept the area with a flashlight. There was nothing. There was no person. There was no movement. He expected to find some kind of evidence, maybe even a handprint left behind in the tent, but there was absolutely nothing. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At first light, he packed his gear and hurried the rest of the way to the cabin. To this day, he has no idea who or what was circling his campsite that night. Stories like this always creep me out, almost more than traditional ghost stories, because you never really know what you are coming face to face with. Was it a ghost? Was it a person? Or was it some other humanoid creature lurking in the woods? This was a remote campsite, miles from the nearest road, and something was circling the camp in the dark and whispering outside of the tent. Now, if this was you, would you continue to sleep? And I'm well aware that this could have been maybe someone cracked out, I don't know, running around in the woods, whether they were homeless or not. But I almost find that kind of unlikely because of how far off the beaten path this was. So that really makes me wonder what was essentially stalking him. Now, I actually have one additional story that I want to share on today's episode. And although it doesn't take place while someone is traveling, it does take place deep in the woods. And I thought it would be the perfect addition to today's episode. Now, this was actually shared on Ask Reddit. And the question was, Forest Rangers, what are your unexplainable and downright creepy stories? And the user, Too Gone Too Fast, shared the story about 8 years ago. They themselves are not the ranger, but their uncle was. And this is the story that he heard from his uncle. This user writes, he always told the story of when he worked in Montana. He was a solid 5-10 miles away from town, so pretty much balls deep in the woods. He recalled pulling his ATV on top of a semi big hill that overlooked a valley. In between all the trees, there was this clearing he could see through his binoculars. Through them, he saw an older lady, 60 ish, dressed in all black, surrounded by 6 to 8 wolves. Now, he's a long way from the woman, but he starts yelling and honking and all of that and takes off down the hill as fast as he can. But when he reaches the clearing, there was no one there. No wolves, no woman, only a silver ring with a black stone in the middle. He still has it to this day. Could there be a mundane explanation? Perhaps. I mean, the distance can play tricks on your perception, but then again, he still ended up finding a ring, which is odd enough. And anytime I hear a story about a mysterious woman in the woods or the wilderness, my mind always goes to she's a witch or some kind of spirit or forest guardian. Now, do I believe in witches in the sense of old hags in the middle of the woods that can all of a sudden turn into a flock of crows or bats and simply disappear? No, not necessarily. I mean, I believe that people out there actively practice witchcraft and other rituals. So I found this story really interesting. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. What do you think this man witnessed? Was he really seeing an old woman in black, or was he mistaken a couple of wolves that were standing next to one another as a figure? I don't really know what to think of it. It is just very weird and bizarre, and I would love to hear what you all think. That is the final story in today's episode. I do hope you enjoyed these spooky stories. This is the part of the episode where I leave it up to you to decide what you believe what's going on here. Head over to my social media and comment on the new episode post or share your comments on Spotify on what you believe. And if you've ever experienced anything strange while traveling, such as in a hotel, an Airbnb, or a cabin, or perhaps out in the woods, I would love to hear your stories. You can share them by emailing unlockingtheparanormalpod@gmail.com or by calling the hotline. The phone number for the hotline will be in the show notes. But basically, with the hotline, you call, you leave a voicemail. You have, I think, 2 to 3 minutes to leave a voicemail. If you don't get through your story, feel free to call back and leave another voicemail. Just let me know that it is the second half of your story. And who knows, you might even hear it featured in a future episode of the Spooky Summer series. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss a new deep dive into the paranormal immensely. And don't forget to check out my social media for additional creepy content. I am on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Until next time, stay curious.